Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of Stats Chat. It's been a really busy week, as always. When is it ever not these days? Just last night, I was able to go on to Small Council Radio and discuss with the hosts. It was an episode with myself and Clarence Lee, otherwise known as Ariakas through A Song of Ice and Fire Stats, who you may recognise as the recent winner of the NRG TTS League. Between Clarence and Brett, who came first and second, and some of the stats which I helped to provide to the conversation, there were some really interesting insights into what it was like to play in that event and how it is really helping to define and shape the meta right now, what we should be looking at in future events. And there was some really great advice, particularly from Clarence, who's got some really interesting insights into the game. So if you want to, I'm going to put the link down below. So after you've watched this, then go ahead and check out the latest Small Council Radio episode. They've been running for 28 weeks now, which is amazing. That's over 6 months of content that they've been putting out on a weekly basis. I'm here on my 6th episode, and already, I'm starting to struggle to find new content, new ideas, new things to discuss with you. And they've been doing really good stuff for 6 months. They are also a member of the Song of Ice and Fire Guild, so it's always great to collaborate and work with those guys because that's what the guild's all about. Helping each other to really push our work forward and produce great content for you listeners. I'm also really happy to announce that this week we've gone live with our new event format over at NRG, where we've created a new system called, which we've coined the First Builder League. So what this is going to do is it's going to try and promote players to build new style lists to react to the meta and react to the game modes that they're being given, because this format is going to be a competitive tournament played over a series of different events, which the players are going to be randomly assigned their faction and commanders each time. So what this is really going to do is going to test their skills across a whole range of factions, test their ability to play under changing circumstances, and stop our online meta becoming stale and really test the player skill more than test their ability to play with a single defined meta list. I've been really pleased with the response. It's been live for about 4 days and it's already at 64 players. There is no player limit on this, so if you're interested, then get yourself onto the NRG Discord. I'll put a link to that below as well. And if you contact me, then I'll assign you your random faction, your random commanders, and you can get down to preparing your lists. The event won't start for another 2 weeks. I've tried to give a lot of time for players to find out about the event. With the first NRG League, a lot of players missed out because it's obviously not everybody watches these videos, not everybody's aware of what's going on A Song of Ice and Fire Stats. So wanted to give everybody as much time as possible, but also want to give people lots of time to prepare their lists. They're going to be playing in really new formats, loads of exciting stuff going on there. So definitely check out the First Builders League because it is going to be even bigger and even better than the first NRG competition. It's going to be the biggest international tournament on TTS yet, and I also think it's just going to be a really good format, so give that a go. So with lots of TTS events currently running all across the world, we see a lot of national-based events, but we also see some international events with players playing from Australia against roughly the rest of the world from the Assaulting River Run. Also a big shout out to any French listeners who might be out there, because Google Analytics shows that actually we're getting a ton of French users, which is really brilliant. I know there's a really strong community down in France, and there's currently a very competitive event running there. We also have a German event running. There's a US event about to kick off. A UK event is currently still looking for more signups. So there is a whole range of events going on, and all of these are feeding back into this this faction power ranking that we see in front of us. It's an ever-changing ecosystem, and it reflects not a single game. It doesn't reflect a single person, a single list, or individual player skill anymore. It is definitely now a truly global definition of how powerful these factions are, and we've got the kind of submissions that we've always needed now to be able to say that we're pretty confident in how powerful these factions are stacking up against each other. We'll see them trend in different directions over weeks. If you want to watch back to old videos, you'll see that, you know, the meta is not completely stable. Things change. It doesn't even necessarily take new releases for the meta to shift. It can be just based on popularity or week-to-week shifts. So really continue to check out the site, see what's changing, and see what insights you can find out. But of course, what can I tell you? Well, the faction power rankings still remain relatively static. They are relatively settled in their current position. This last week, we've seen the Lannisters overtake the Free Folk. The Free Folk have been steadily trending down for quite a while. And interestingly, I'm going to talk about what causes that, why the Free Folk are currently slowly declining, and where we can expect them to end up, and what will kind of cause their turnaround in the faction in general. More importantly, why this factional ELO is a much better indication of how the faction is performing on a competitive level to looking at its win ratio. Lots of people like to use win ratio because it's such an obvious number to look at. If it's greater than 50%, then you're winning more than half the time. If it's less than 50%, you're mostly losing. But this ELO number can be quite confusing. If you are interested in the way that calculation comes about and some of the mathematics that goes into it, I mean, it's quite a complicated process. It's very difficult to explain it all, particularly with words. So there is an article which I'll also link down below in the description. You can go and check that out, and it uses hopefully some graphs and some relatively intuitive maths to talk you through the kind of things that go into every calculation that you submit to the site. Every time you send in a new submission, it's going to go through all of this statistical work to decide how much effect that's going to have upon these ELO values. So we see our Free Folk drop down from second place into third place. It really wasn't that long ago, only a month ago, that the Free Folk sat up at number 1. But they've been steadily declining towards a more balanced 0 value. The Night's Watch have not had a great week. They've lost some points. They were creeping up towards the Lannisters. They looked like they could, you know, threaten for third place. But the Night's Watch themselves seem very, very settled around that 0 value, plus or minus 10 or 15. It's been a while since they didn't occupy that kind of space in the middle of the table, almost with a balanced 0. The Baratheons, as much as they have been the talk of the town, they are still not quite getting there. They're still not balanced. So it's interesting that there was a huge surge in their use in the NRG TTS League. But it turns out that despite Stannis, Thousand Lord Commander, managing to take them all the way to the final, their overall finishing position was relatively weak. Their overall win rate was less than 50%. And I don't think that all the things that people thought were going to like really change the game, Melisandre particularly, and maybe some of the complaints we see around Rose Knights, when you actually look at their win rates, they're not affecting the game in the way that you think that they might theoretically do. In the reality, when it comes down to actually winning games, they have too many flaws to be used at really in that really high level competitive play for them to dominate in the way that you think that they maybe could. And of course, we have our neutrals and our Targaryens who continually sit towards the bottom of our rankings. The neutrals are just struggling for choices. The way the game is set up right now, I don't think ever really favours the neutrals. Their tactics deck, while good, is not enough of a draw to overcome the fact that you can cherry pick the best parts of neutrals and put them into any other faction outside of Free Folk, and yet you still have tons of points to buy all the best things from your own faction. So I think the neutrals really struggle for an identity. The Targaryens, they've dragged themselves up a few points, but they're pretty confident down there at the bottom. They're not going anywhere fast. And I think it's going to take a big release for them to really move into the realms of competitive nature. So talking more specifically about the Free Folk and kind of highlighting the way this ELO system works and what its main advantages are. We see that the Free Folk have, over the past 7 days, they've dropped quite a large 23 points. That's knocked them down from second to third in the rankings. Over the past 35 days, they've lost 45 points. And yet, they maintain the highest overall win rate of all factions. They still have a 61% win rate. Of all the factions, and we'll look at Stark in a second and kind of see how that's different, they win games the most often. So why are they not number one, and why are they currently trending down? What that's about is the ELO system. It favors the more recent information over historical information. That's why it's a continuously evolving and live kind of meta discussion, as opposed to something which is set in stone. Every new result is more important than every other result that would previously went. The number you see, it takes account of the newest set of results, but also it's considering the old results at the same time. But the more and more new data we receive, the less and less it cares about the old results. So when we look in the past 7 days, the Free Folk have been performing particularly badly. They've only won 1/3 of their games. In the past month, they've won just under half of their games. This below average performance of recent means that they are trending downwards, trending towards a negative value, at least trending towards a 0 value. But overall, in their all-time data, they are still the highest performers. But their ELO value is much more concerned with how they've been performing recently. And that's why it's such a great measure of the competitive structure right now, and means so much more than what is their win ratio. It represents how much impact they have on the game and how likely you are to win a tournament with that faction. Looking in contrast at the Starks, we see they have an overall win rate of only 54.5%. This is significantly behind the 61% that the Free Folk are posting. And it is over an incredibly large number of results. The Starks alone have 671 submissions to their name. That's huge numbers of tournaments, huge numbers of data entry submissions, and a huge number of different players playing the faction. But of recent form, they are performing above that 54%, and actually in the last month, they've achieved a 57% win ratio. This is much higher than the recent form of the Free Folk, and also, incidentally, is almost identical to their overall faction win rate in the NRG TTS League, where they won 58% of all their games. In the past week alone, they've had a very strong 68% win ratio, but that is not necessarily enough to massively send them right up the rankings, give them a really high score, because they are already number one. They are already performing very well, and so you need to continue to perform well for your ranking to go up, and it has to be a very, very high win ratio for you to obtain the kind of plus 100s that we've seen factions get close to, or on the other end of the scale for those losing, the minus 100 we've seen at times. That's where the Baratheons were before their set of Hero 1 and 2 release, before the Rose Knights and the Law Faithful came along, and then before Targaryen's Heroes 1 came along, the Targaryens were also sat with a roughly minus 100 ranking. To put into perspective, that is really, really not a good situation to be in. To achieve that kind of level, you have to be winning about 20% or less of all your games in a competitive format, which is just not really what you want for a balanced competitive game. If you have dedicated yourself to playing Targaryens, to know that you're only going to win one in 5 games is really rough. That's going to turn you off the game and turn you off wanting to ever enter a tournament with that faction. So, that's not the kind of numbers we want to see for a balanced competitive game. This 68% win ratio is a little bit concerning for the Starks. It's very, very high. Again, that's higher than we want for balance. But overall, when we look more in the past 30 days, the 57 is far more acceptable. And their all-time historical data of 54% is as good a balance as we could ever expect. I have talked relative length in different stats chats and different kind of podcasts, different articles about there are some very specific Stark lists out there that are posting extremely high win rates. They are a concern for the game balance, but Starks as a whole definitely aren't. And if you take the win rate of those specific list builds away from the Starks quite quickly drop away to about a 50% win ratio again. They don't represent the kind of Starks that most players play. They only represent a really extreme meta-defining kind of competitive list build. So if you don't see Starks dominating in your local area, it's most likely due to the fact that people aren't playing this net list kind of build, and it's probably for the best. It's for the best that these kind of lists don't represent the norm of what people are playing, because we don't want to see the norm be a faction winning all the time or a faction losing all the time. What we want to see is really close, good balance, which is more and more about player skill and less about the faction you've picked or the list that you've built. So how about the commander power rankings for this week? Well, Rob continues to climb and climb and climb, now achieving a 111 rating, which is just new territory, uncharted territory for the stats site. No commander has ever been that dominant before, and is really representative of the fact that in the NRG TTS League, he posted a 70% win ratio. He dominated any faction matchup that wasn't against other Starks. He is not the specialist to play into Starks himself. That's really where Howland kind of finds his place. And I think that when you're playing competitively right now, if you're playing to really win a tournament, you have to be building around what Rob or Howland can do, that 10 activation Stark list that could be brought against you. And just mostly because of how popular the Starks are, they make up almost a third of every entry into every tournament. So if there is at least 3 rounds, then you can near guarantee that you're going to play a Stark at some point. And if you're up in the top half of that bracket, it's very likely that they will have a very high activation count propped up by a number of direwolves. And you need to have a plan of how you will counter that. That doesn't mean the list can't lose. That doesn't mean as soon as you see that, you can't win. But you do need to come prepared with a plan. I'm really pleased to say that a favourite of mine, Courtney Penrose, is this week's top performing commander. I am going to spend the next couple of minutes trying to convince you why, if you've been playing Baratheons, you should definitely be considering playing Courtney Penrose at any time. Not just maybe into the game modes which you think traditionally favor an NCU commander. Courtney Penrose has a wonderful set of tactic cards. He has a brilliant NCU ability, and he pairs very, very well into the Baratheons, or more to the point, he tries to cover up a lot of the Baratheon weaknesses right now, which is that they are a relatively low activation count army. They also, on the Renly side, they have an incredibly good unit in the Rose Knights, as long as you can afford that 7-point price tag. They also scale very well with lots of the 1-point attachments out there. So really that unit's quite likely going to cost you 8 points. But can you afford 8 points? Multiple times, because the value of Rose Knights often just multiplies the more you have. One unit of them can be ignored, can be maneuvered around, but multiple units can start to create this impenetrable wall that can only be fought from the front. And when you fight Rose Knights from the front, things normally go pretty badly for you. So Courtney, as an NCU commander, helps to buy you that 1 free activation, helps to keep your activation count high, gets you into that 8 activation bracket in the 40-point range without forcing you to compromise on quality of units that you're going to buy. Still allows you to bring those Rose Knights, maybe even squeeze in the 10-point champions of the Stag that we now see. And yet, he is performing well in the game modes that don't favor an on-field commander. Those game modes such as Fire and Blood, where an on-field commander can give out a VP every turn, he has a greater than 50% win ratio. In Feast for Crows, where having a commander on an objective token will score you 2 VPs, he still posts a 50% win ratio. Very interesting. From the NRG TTS event as a whole, when an NCU commander played a on-field attachment commander, the NCU commander won 59% of those games versus the 41% that the on-field attachment commander won. That's irrespective of game mode. Even though roughly half of the game modes favor an on-field commander and half favor an NCU commander, we see the only game mode from the NRG TTS League which favored, for win rate, the on-field commander was Fire and Blood. But interestingly, Fire and Blood is already a big strength of the Baratheons. Giving an extra +2 attacks to any of these really dangerous units that the Baratheons can field is an absolute nightmare. So if you can bring Courtney, who already has a greater than 50% win ratio, into Fire and Blood, we see over here on the left, other than a few games against Night's Watch, he has a greater than 50% win ratio into every factional matchup. This guy has a great tool set. And I think that he should be comprising your main factional list in a 2-list format. There is a really brilliant spotlight written by Yannick Burr and Brett Lampfer, two really high-level competitive players, analysing Courtney Penrose, looking at his strengths, helping you build a really powerful Courtney list. And I think that that is, if you're looking to play Baratheons competitively, where you should maybe like take step 1 of what your 2-list format will be. And the real question is, what will be the list that you try and pair that with? Traditionally, it would be said that you would pick an on-field commander, but I'm going to tell you today that you don't need to feel pressured to take an on-field commander in either of your lists with the Baratheons right now. They are performing at their best with NCU commanders, and Courtney Penrose and the NRG event in general have proven that you can take an NCU commander into a game mode which traditionally should favor the on-field attachment and still perform well. as long as you understand why you've taken it, where your strengths are, and sculpted the rest of the list around being strong into these game modes, I think you're going to have a lot of success. Courtney's win ratio is nearly 58%. That's significantly above the Baratheons as a whole. He is the number 3 overall ranked commander right now, and he is, in my mind, without a doubt, the best Baratheon choice. I think where things get interesting is, who will be your number 2? Will you go over to the Stannis side to give yourself a different flavour? And if you do, I think you should definitely consider going with Axel Florent as your secondary NCU commander and running a double NCU list. I think it will be such a break from the norm right now, but at the same time, it will bring you a lot of options. You can create yourself a very tanky, healing-based Rose Knight list, and at the same time, give yourself a very aggressive R'hllor Faithful with the Red Priestess. Even Bolton Bastard Girls are finding great use in that kind of Stannis-based list, which both combine incredibly well with Axel Florent's tactics cards. And you can make your choice less about what game mode is this. Do I need to pick my on-field commander or my NCU commander? And you should now be looking against my 2 opponents list. Do I want to be aggressive or do I want to be defensive? And I think that whole new dynamic is going to help push the Baratheons into the top tier, help them find a new approach to the game, because I think that the traditional approach isn't favouring them right now. I think that's the real time that they need to become a competitive faction, in the way that people start to adapt their list building to what the Baratheons need, as opposed to applying the list building mentalities that they've learned from other factions. So I think Baratheons are in a really unique situation right now, and I'm a big fan, and that's something that I'm going to be trying, because the old mentality that I've had from building my lists the way Lannisters generally get built, building a High Sparrow based list for the NCU favoured game modes and a Tyrion list for the on-field commander favoured game modes, has not been faring me very well for the Baratheons. So looking at my own stats, my own personal page, I realised that I'm significantly worse when playing Baratheons versus when I'm playing Lannisters. And that's the kind of insights that I'm finding from looking into these stats, from what other people are playing and from what I've been playing, and really is what the stat site is about. So hopefully you can take that information away with you. Maybe send me a message if you've given it a go, if I'm actually, totally sending you in the wrong direction, you've given it a go and it turns out that that's bad advice. I'm more than happy to hear it. Let me know if there's any things that you're interested in, and I'll have a look at them for next week. But thanks for joining me again. Loads of exciting things coming along. There's lots of TTS events running right now. There are also some physical events starting to get run again. Keep an eye on what they will be doing to the meta, where we will end up in a short space of time, and whether or not anybody's going to come up with a solution for this really high-performing 10 activation Stark-based meta that we've seen recently. We'll see whether or not Axel Florent as a 3-point NCU is maybe an answer to that, or if we're all just going to have to stick with Walder, who is about most factions' best counter to that. But like I say, new format of the First Builders League, really excited about that. And also, I'm hopefully very, very soon going to have a whole new look to the website to reveal to you. But as all these things always do, it's been dragging on a little bit. So I'm hoping to get that out to you really soon, because I'm really excited to show you all the work that we've been doing at Song of Ice and Fire Stats. I hope that you keep coming back, keep submitting results, and keep using the site, because the user base is just growing all the time. Really pleased to say that we have roughly about 1,000 different people come to the site over the past month. More than that, it's actually about 1.2 thousand, which is way more than we had just a month ago. So I think the future's all looking good. So just stick with us and let us know what you would like to see the site do in the future. Any kind of features that you're interested in, or the kind of thing that I'll try and build. I'm building the site for the community, for what the community wants. So always happy to hear from you. Until next week, see you later.